Good morning. It's Tuesday, the 28th of January. You're tuned in to our 10 a.m. newscast coming to you from ARIRANG's news centre in Seoul. Let's take a look at what's making the headlines. South Korea is awaiting North Korea's response to its proposal to hold working-level talks to arrange inter-Korean family reunions next month at the North's Mount Kumgang resort. Meeting with a South Korean lawmaker in Tehran, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani offers to play a mediator's role for difficult inter-Korean issues, including North Korea's nuclear program. Plus, bowing to intense pressure, Ukraine's president says he will scrap a highly controversial anti-protest law that sparked a wave of violent clashes between protesters and police over the past week. We start with the latest on Seoul's proposal to hold reunions for families separated since the Korean War. While hopes are high the North will accept the offer to hold the event in mid-February, the South Korean government is still awaiting a response from Pyongyang. Hwang Sang-hee has our top story.
Families separated since the Korean War will have the chance to see each other again in mid-February if North Korea agrees to South Korea's offer made on Monday.
Considering the wishes of the separated families, we propose holding a round of family reunions at the Mount Kumgang resort from February 17th to the 22nd for 6 days.
This follows Pyongyang's surprise proposal on Friday that the reunions resume at a convenient time for Seoul after the Lunar New Year holiday, which falls at the end of this week. South Korea's Unification Ministry said the proposed dates are flexible and asked to hold working-level talks on Wednesday at the truce village of Panmunjom to fine-tune the details. Pyongyang may want a later date, sometime after the joint military drills between Seoul and Washington, which begin at the end of February. Despite North Korea's repeated calls to cancel what it views as war games, South Korea made clear that the humanitarian event and the military training exercises are two separate matters.
When we selected the date, we considered the preparation process at Mount Kumgang and the urgency of holding family reunions. The joint military drills between South Korea and the U.S. were not considered.
Millions of Koreans were separated from their loved ones when the country was divided more than 6 decades ago. Around 72,000 South Koreans are on a waiting list for a chance to meet their families one last time. But it's been 3 years now since the last reunions. If the event takes place next month, 100 divided family members from each side who are selected for last year's cancelled reunions will meet with their loved ones. However, a handful of these aging relatives have fallen ill since then, underscoring the urgency of resuming the long-suspended reunions. Hwang Sang-hee, ARIRANG News.
Iranian President Hassan Rouhani says he would be willing to play the role of mediator for difficult inter-Korean issues, including North Korea's nuclear program. President Rouhani made the remarks during a meeting with South Korean National Assembly Speaker Kang Chang-hee, who arrived in Tehran on Sunday to hold talks with senior Iranian officials. According to Kang's spokesperson, Rouhani added that Tehran would be able to help resolve Pyongyang's nuclear issue, given Iran's experiences in dealing with Western powers over the issue. The top nuclear envoys of the US and China have reportedly been seeking ways to reopen international talks to curb North Korea's nuclear ambitions. The US point man on the North, Glyn Davies, met his Chinese counterpart Wu Da-wei in Beijing on Monday, where the two negotiators discussed the conditions under which the six-party nuclear talks can restart after a 5-year impasse. Washington is demanding Pyongyang take sincere and concrete steps towards denuclearization before returning to talks. Beijing wants to resume dialogue right away to ease security concerns on the Korean peninsula. The discussions come amid the North's recent peace offensive towards the south. After speaking to reporters about his talks in China, Davies will head to Seoul on this Tuesday and then to Tokyo later in the week. Now, in a move that's sure to ignite diplomatic tensions between South Korea and Japan, the Japanese government is set to announce fresh claims to Korea's Dokdo Island on this Tuesday. Japan's Kyodo news agency says Tokyo will lay out the final revised guidelines for middle and high school textbooks, which include claims to Korea's easternmost island. The guidelines will also accuse Korea of illegally occupying Dokdo. The manuals are often used as reference materials for new editions of school textbooks. Seoul's foreign ministry has long condemned the move, saying Tokyo must drop its unjustified claims. Now, the best efforts of quarantine officials to stop the spread of bird flu appear ever more likely to be in vain after a suspected case of the virus was reported in Korea's central Gyeonggi-do Province. The Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs said on Tuesday that a chicken farm in the city of Pyeongtaek has been cordoned off and investigations are underway. If confirmed, this would actually be the first case of bird flu at a farm in Gyeonggi-do Province, and it raises fears the virus is encircling the capital, Seoul. Meanwhile, disease prevention authorities have started using helicopters to fumigate areas in Korea's central Chungcheongnam-do and Gyeonggi-do provinces where migratory birds carrying the virus have been found. The government and the ruling Saenuri Party will hold an emergency meeting later on this Tuesday to coordinate efforts to stem the spread of the virus over the upcoming Lunar New Year holiday. Now, from one crisis gripping the nation to another, namely the massive leak of personal and financial information, we can now count President Park Geun-hye among those up in arms about the data breach. The president didn't mince her words either on Monday and even chided one of her officials for not taking the issue seriously enough. Our presidential office correspondent, Oh Jin-ju, reports.
President Park is firm about holding those involved in the massive data leak of 20 million bank and credit card users responsible.
이번에 문제가 된 세 개 카드사 이외에 다른 회사에서는 개인정보 유출이 없었는지 전 금융회사를 대상으로 철저히 조사를 하고.
Meeting with her top secretaries on Monday, the president described the leak as, quote, something that should have never happened, and ordered officials to devise measures to ensure that customers do not suffer when financial firms collect and store personal data. She also urged those firms to find other ways to identify individuals rather than relying solely on resident registration numbers, which are widely used in Korea. Other options, she says, could include the use of driver's license numbers. President Park also slammed Deputy Prime Minister Hyun Oh-seok's controversial remarks last week on the data leak, saying they only increase distrust among the public. Hyun faced strong backlash from the public and politicians after saying that, quote, foolish people always try to put the blame on others when something happens, and don't we all agree with financial firms when we provide personal information? The comments came in response to questions on whether the heads of the nation's financial watchdogs will resign over the incident.
앞으로 공직자 모두가 정말 국민을 위하고 존중하는 마음으로 임해주기를 바라면서 이런 일이 재발할 시에는 그 책임을 반드시 물을 것입니다.
President Park called for a swift passage of a bill on financial consumer protection at a provisional session of the National Assembly in February to prevent similar crises from happening again. Oh Jin-ju, ARIRANG News.
In a move to curb possible follow-up crimes following the massive personal and financial data leak, prosecutors say they will detain and investigate those suspected of illegally trading personal information and will seek the maximum penalty for those found guilty. The Supreme Prosecutor's Office announced Monday that it will carry out a crackdown on all related crimes by activating over 700 investigators. The types of crimes under the microscope include voice phishing and smishing, which are financial fraud schemes using phone calls and text messages. The maximum penalty for these crimes is up to 5 years in prison or up to about $45,000 in fines. Korea has become even more dependent on China as an export destination. The Trade Ministry says exports to China accounted for 26% of Korea's export total of $560 billion last year, which is the highest rate ever recorded. Mobile phone parts, semiconductors, auto parts and automobiles made up the bulk of exports to China, resulting in a trade surplus of $60.6 billion, which is higher than Korea's overall trade surplus of $44.2 billion. Experts say Korea should take a more aggressive approach in dealing with the ever-growing Chinese market, adding it may need to reduce its dependence on China in the future, given its slowing economic growth. Concerns over the US Federal Reserve stimulus tapering and slowing growth in China took a big bite out of Korea's benchmark stock market on Monday, but Seoul wasn't alone as stock markets across Asia tumbled on the first day of the week. Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
The sell-off in global markets turned toward Asia on Monday, with stocks across the region plunging in trading as worries grow over slowing growth in China and signs that the U.S. will ease back on stimulus measures. Shares in Seoul slumped to a 5-month low to start the week. The benchmark Kospi dropped 1.5% to close at 1910 after dipping as low as 1899 at one point, its lowest level since August last year. Indexes in other countries met similar fates. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index dropped 1.5% to a 4.5-month low, while Japan's Nikkei dropped 2.5% to 15,000, the lowest closing level since mid-November, as the yen touched a 7-week high against the greenback. The declines first hit developing economies, with the currencies in Argentina, Turkey, and South Africa depreciating to new levels not seen in years. Experts attribute the sell-off from investors growing wary of tightening credit conditions in China as Beijing seeks to curb growth. The capital flight is also being fueled by expectations that the U.S. Federal Reserve will decide to taper an additional $10 billion off their bond buying programs during their 2-day policy meeting that begins on Tuesday. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
And Korean stocks inched down upon opening on Tuesday as of around 10 past 10 a.m., which is a couple of moments ago. The benchmark Kospi was trading at 1912, which is up 1 single point from Monday's close. Now, the heavy sell-off in Korea and other emerging markets on Monday sparked fresh concerns that we might be about to see a repeat of the massive currency sell-off that crippled Asian markets in the late 1990s. Our Yulian explains.
Emerging markets, once fragile and small, fell like dominoes 15 years ago from the Asian financial crisis. Times have changed since then, but the massive sell-off seen in recent days indicates those countries are just as vulnerable as they were back in the late 1990s. From relatively sound economies like Mexico to politically rocky Turkey, investor jitters about the prospects for emerging economies are spreading fast. And the massive sell-off could speed up to an unprecedented level, as the money that flowed into emerging markets in recent years dwarfs the sums that fled some 15 years ago. Huge amounts of cheap cash from the U.S. Federal Reserve's massive stimulus program have flowed into emerging markets in recent years, hunting for higher returns. Now that the Fed is poised to further scale back its stimulus, that flow is rapidly reversing. But unlike last year, this year's sell-off is being exacerbated by local factors.
The Turkish situation has nothing to do with South Africa. That has nothing to do with the Ukraine. That has nothing to do with the slowdown. Partially we're seeing in China, Thailand. But when you add them up, it looks like a crisis. Now, the problem with them being all very different is there's no single solution.
With concerns looming over a foreign exchange crisis in Argentina and the Turkish central bank's ability to keep interest rates low, emerging economies are bracing for even greater outflows in the coming days and weeks. Yulian, ARIRANG News.
Turning now to the latest developments in Ukraine, the country's beleaguered President Viktor Yanukovych has agreed to scrap anti-protest legislation that set off a wave of violent clashes between protesters and police over the past week. The repeal of that law was one of the opposition's main demands during talks Monday, but the president has shown no willingness to offer amnesty for arrested protesters unless protesters stop occupying buildings and end their mass demonstrations in central Kiev. Officials say the anti-protest law will likely be scrapped at a special parliament session on Tuesday. It's not immediately clear how the announcement will be received by the protesters in Kiev, but it's likely to be seen as a small victory over the government going into the crunch parliamentary session. Peace talks aimed at bringing an end to the conflict in Syria are deadlocked, with the Syrian government and the opposition delegation unable to agree on a future role for President Bashar al-Assad. In Geneva Monday, the Syrian government team is reported to have laid out what it called a declaration of principles that did not mention transfer of power. One of Assad's ministers told reporters that the president has no intention of, quote, giving up the keys to Damascus. Emerging from the meeting, the opposition delegation said the talks were not constructive and there had been no progress on humanitarian issues either. The talks will continue on Tuesday. Egypt's top military body has given Army Chief Abdel Fattah el-Sisi the green light to run for the presidency. Sisi, who also serves as the country's defense minister, helped oust the country's first democratically elected president, Mohamed Morsi, in July last year. He is yet to announce whether he will run, but the move by Egypt's Supreme Council of the Armed Forces is essentially seen as an endorsement for his candidacy. If his candidacy is confirmed, Sisi is expected to win by a landslide given his popularity and a lack of any serious rivals. Presidential elections are expected by the end of April. Apple has announced profits of slightly over $13 billion for the fiscal 2014 first quarter. The company's shares tumbled 6% in after-hours trading after iPhone sales fell short of analysts' expectations, and Apple offered a weaker-than-expected forecast for this quarter. Apple's revenues rose to $57.6 billion in the October to January period. Over the three-month period, the tech giant sold a record 51 million iPhones, but it actually missed analyst estimates of 54.7 million. Apple also sold a record 26 million iPads, 6 million iPods, and 4.8 million Macs over the three-month period. Korea has edged up one notch to 8th place in terms of innovation capability among 30 OECD member countries. Korea's Science Ministry, together with the Korea Institute of Science and Technology Evaluation and Planning, made the announcement on Monday. Korea claimed the top spot in terms of R&D investment in ratio to its GDP. Korea also scored highly in government-led R&D investment and the number of researchers per every 10,000 people. But protection of intellectual property and the number of quoted papers per researcher were ranked near the bottom. Worldwide, the US ranked #1 in annual innovation capability, followed by Switzerland and Japan. The Korea Grand Sale is now in full swing, with more than 27,000 stores taking part across the country. The annual shopping festival is aimed at promoting the nation's retail industry to tourists through special deals and events. Our Paulie reports.
Here in the Myeongdong shopping district in the heart of Seoul, customers from around the world crowd into local shops and stores. The 2014 Korea Grand Sale kicked off earlier this month at major tourist areas in cities across the country, including Seoul, Busan, Gwangju, and Jeju. The shopping extravaganza is marketed towards foreigners by offering exclusive sales discounts and benefits at department stores, restaurants, hotel accommodations, as well as other local companies. Nearly 120 companies across more than 27,000 venues nationwide have signed up to take part this year, including popular tourist attractions and even traditional Korean markets. It's an important time for the retail industry as it prepares to welcome a wave of Chinese tourists who have emerged as the largest group of international travelers to Korea. The Spring Festival, China's biggest national holiday, will begin at the end of this month and run through February 6, in celebration of the Lunar New Year. Businesses have already decorated their shops in bright red and put up translated signs with prices featuring the number 8, both which are favored by Chinese customers. Improving conveniences for foreign shoppers is also a focus this year. Additional translators and tour guides will be deployed to help foreigners, while free Wi-Fi hotspots will be offered to help connect them to online resources in 5 languages. The Korea Grand Sale will run through February 16th, offering visitors and foreign residents special weekly deals and cultural performances. Looking ahead, the Visit Korea Committee says they plan to continue developing the sale into one of Asia's most popular shopping events. Paul Yi, ARIRANG News.
And a good Tuesday morning to you all as we kick things off with the latest news in figure skating. Now, with the Winter Games in Sochi less than 2 weeks away, we're all looking forward to watching Kim Yeon-ah go after her 2nd straight gold medal. And apparently it's not just Korea that feels that way. Now, according to an article by NBC Sports, figure skater Kim Yeon-ah was ranked #1 in a list of storylines to watch in figure skating. The report stated that with Kim Yeon-ah setting world records in the short and free skating program during the 2010 Vancouver Games, the big question of whether or not she can do it again made her the top figure skater to watch this year. And moving on, it's another set of events to watch during the Sochi Winter Games, bobsledding and skeleton. And on Monday, the bobsleigh and skeleton team held a media day press conference. The Korean bobsleigh team, who qualify for every event in the Olympics, isn't setting their goals too high, but instead stated that they want to finish within top 15 and do better during the Pyeongtaek Winter Games in 2018. And for 20-year-old Yoon Sung-bin, who's representing the skeleton team, stated that he's not going to look forward to immediate success, but instead go after the long-term success of winning a medal during the 2018 Pyeongtaek Winter Games. More national team news, this time over in basketball. Now, on Monday, the Korea Basketball Association named their men's and women's national team head coach, and they're familiar faces. Now, first off, leading the men's national team will be Ulsan Mobis Phoebus' head coach, Yoo Jae-hak, who previously led the national team. The 51-year-old coach will lead the team in their first World Cup competition in 16 years in August before competing in the Asian Games in Incheon. Meanwhile, Chuncheon Uri Bank Hanse's head coach Lee Sung-woo will be leading the women's national team this year, as he's set to lead them to both the World Championships in Turkey and the Asian Games in Incheon as well. And finishing things off, while the 2 coaches were signed to lead the national team, one head coach in the KBL resigned from his position on Monday. After a dismal 14-25 season so far in the KBL, the Seoul Samsung Thunder's head coach Kim Dong-kwang has resigned from his position. Coach Kim, who returned to Samsung back in 2012 after coaching them from 1998 to 2004, made a successful comeback as the head coach of the team, but was set back with several key injuries to his players this season. With his resignation, Coach Kim Sang-sik will take over the head coach position. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day, and see you guys again for your sports needs.
And time now to check in on the weather conditions in Korea and around the world. And that's all for now. Thanks ever so much for joining us. We'll be back at noon Korea time, but in the meantime, you can always check out what's been happening on our website, which can be found at arirang.co.kr/news.